The Anunnaki, ancient gods, or alien visitors. In the cradle of civilization, over 6,000 years ago, the Sumerians wrote about beings who descended from the heavens. They called them the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. These weren't distant ethereal gods. According to the clay tablets, they walked among humans, ruled kingdoms, waged wars, and shaped the very DNA of our species. Were these stories mere mythology, religious allegory, or could they be humanity's oldest historical records, accounts of actual encounters with beings from beyond our world? Today we'll journey through 6,000 years of history, examine ancient texts that predate the Bible by millennia, and explore one of the most controversial questions ever posed. Did extraterrestrial beings once rule Earth? The birth of civilization 6,000 years ago in the fertile valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something extraordinary happened. Almost overnight, in historical terms, hunter-gatherer societies transformed into the world's first civilization. The Sumerians didn't just build cities, they invented the very concept of urban civilization. They created the first written language, the first schools, the first libraries, the first legal codes, and the first complex governments. Most remarkably, they left behind over 500,000 clay tablets, the world's largest collection of ancient texts. And in these tablets, they tell an incredible story about their origins. According to Sumerian records, their civilization wasn't a gradual development. It was a gift, taught to them by divine beings who came from the stars. These beings were called the Anunnaki. The word Anunnaki combines several Sumerian terms: Anu, the sky god, Na, of, and Kai, earth, literally those of Anu who are on earth, or more commonly translated as those who from heaven to earth came. But here's what makes the Sumerian texts unique among ancient mythologies. Most creation stories speak in abstract symbolic terms. The Sumerian texts are different. They read more like historical accounts, filled with specific names, places, dates, and detailed descriptions of technology and genetic manipulation. Let's examine some key texts. The Enuma Elish, often called the Babylonian creation epic, describes how the Anunnaki arrived on Earth. The Epic of Atrahasis tells of genetic experiments to create a primitive worker. The king lists speak of rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods before a great flood. These aren't isolated stories from a single culture. Similar accounts appear worldwide, suggesting either a common source or a shared experience that shaped human memory across the globe. The Anunnaki Pantheon. According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki weren't just a few isolated visitors. They were an entire civilization with a complex hierarchy, family relationships, and political structure. At the top of the hierarchy was Anu, the supreme sky god and ruler of the Anunnaki homeworld. Below him were his sons, who divided authority over different aspects of Earth's governance. Enlil, the god of air and authority, became Earth's operational commander. The texts describe him as stern, sometimes harsh, but ultimately responsible for humanity's welfare. His rival was his half-brother Enki, also called Ea, the god of water, wisdom, and genetic science. The rivalry between Enlil and Enki forms the backbone of many Sumerian stories. Enlil represented order and obedience, while Enki championed humanity and often worked against his brother's harsher policies. Among the female Anunnaki, Inanna stands out. Known later as Ishtar to the Babylonians and Aphrodite to the Greeks, she was described as beautiful, powerful and dangerous. The texts tell of her descent to the underworld, her conflicts with other deities, and her relationships with human rulers. These aren't abstract theological concepts. The texts describe the Anunnaki as having physical bodies, eating food, drinking beer. Yes, the Sumerians invented beer and claimed their gods loved it, forming relationships, and even dying in some cases. The Sumerian king list, carved in stone around 2100 BCE, provides what appears to be a chronological account. It states that before the Great Flood, kings ruled for thousands of years. After the flood, lifespans became more human-like. This pattern suggests a transition from divine rule to human governance. What makes this particularly intriguing is that archaeology confirms many details in these texts. Cities mentioned in the stories have been excavated exactly where the tablets said they would be. Rulers named in the texts have been verified through independent records. But the most controversial aspect of Anunnaki stories isn't their governance of early humans. It's the claim that they created humans in the first place. D. The creation of humanity. Perhaps no aspect of the Anunnaki story is more controversial than their alleged role in human creation. According to multiple Sumerian texts, humans weren't the product of natural evolution. They were engineered. The Epic of Atrahasis, dating to around 1700 BCE, but based on much older sources, tells this story in remarkable detail. According to the text, the Anunnaki came to Earth to mine gold, which they needed to repair their planet's dying atmosphere. Initially, the Anunnaki did this work themselves. But after what the text describes as 40 periods, possibly meaning 144,000 years if we interpret a period as 3,600 years, the worker Anunnaki rebelled. They demanded relief from the harsh labor. The solution, proposed by the scientist god Enki, was to create a primitive worker by genetically combining Anunnaki DNA with that of early hominids already living on Earth. The texts describe this process in terms that sound remarkably like modern genetic engineering. Here's what the Atrahasis epic says, translated directly from Cuneiform. Mix the clay with the flesh and blood of a god, let a god and man be mixed together in clay. Another text, the Enki and Ninmah myth, describes the process even more specifically. It mentions purification baths, the extraction of essence from male Anunnaki, and implantation into female wombs. The terminology is strikingly similar to modern descriptions of genetic engineering and artificial insemination. Now, mainstream science tells us that modern humans evolved naturally over millions of years. But there are some puzzling aspects to human development that have intrigued researchers. The rapid development of human intelligence, our unusual genetic uniformity compared to other species, and certain junk DNA sequences that serve no apparent function, have all raised questions among geneticists. The scientific consensus strongly supports natural evolution. But it's worth noting that the Sumerian creation account doesn't necessarily contradict evolution. Instead, it suggests that evolution was guided or accelerated through artificial intervention. The texts describe multiple attempts to perfect the human design. Early versions were either too much like animals or too much like gods. The successful version was called Adamu, a word that means those made from earth and bears an obvious similarity to the biblical name Adam. Whether you accept this account literally or metaphorically, it represents humanity's oldest written explanation for our own existence. and it raises profound questions about our origins that we're still trying to answer today. Tzafrazat, the Great Flood and Departure. Nearly every ancient culture tells stories of a great flood that nearly destroyed humanity. The Sumerian version, however, provides specific details about why it happened and who survived. According to the Epic of Gilgamesh and other texts, the flood wasn't a natural disaster. It was a deliberate decision by the Anunnaki leadership. The stories suggest that humanity had become too numerous and rebellious, threatening Anunnaki control. Enlil, the stern commander, advocated for completely wiping out the human race, but his brother Enki disagreed. In secret, Enki warned a human named Utnapishtim, called Ziusudra in Sumerian texts, and later Noah in Hebrew accounts. The instructions Enki gave for building the ark are remarkably specific. The vessel was to be a perfect cube, 120 cubits on each side, with 7 levels and multiple compartments. These aren't the dimensions of a traditional boat. They describe something more like a survival shelter designed to ride out a catastrophe. Geologists have found evidence of massive flooding in Mesopotamia around 2900 BCE. Core samples from the Persian Gulf show a dramatic change in sediment layers, suggesting a catastrophic flood that covered vast areas. But the Mesopotamian flood story stands out for another reason: its global parallels. Hindu texts describe Manu surviving a great flood. Chinese legends tell of Yu the Great controlling massive floods. Native American tribes across North America have flood stories virtually identical to the Sumerian version. This suggests either that flood stories spread through cultural contact, or that multiple civilizations experienced similar catastrophes and remembered them in their mythologies. According to Sumerian texts, the flood marked a turning point in Anunnaki-human relations. After the waters receded, the Anunnaki began withdrawing from direct involvement in human affairs. The texts describe a gradual transition from direct rule to indirect influence. The Anunnaki established human kings as intermediaries, created priestly classes to maintain their worship, and eventually retreated to their celestial realm. But they didn't disappear entirely. The texts promise their eventual return, particularly when their homeworld completes its orbit and approaches Earth again. This cyclical return forms the basis for many modern Anunnaki theories, Zecharia Sitchin and the modern interpretation. For most of human history, the Anunnaki stories were read as mythology, fascinating insights into ancient religious beliefs, but not literal historical accounts. That changed in the 1970s with the work of one controversial scholar. Zecharia Sitchin was born in Russia, raised in Palestine and educated in London. He spent decades learning to read cuneiform and claimed to have translated thousands of Sumerian, Babylonian, and Akkadian texts. In 1976, Sitchin published The 12th Planet, the first in his Earth Chronicles series. His central claim was revolutionary. The Anunnaki weren't mythological gods, but flesh and blood extraterrestrial beings from a planet called Nibiru. According to Sitchin's interpretation, Nibiru is a large planet with an extremely elliptical orbit that brings it close to Earth every 3,600 years. He claimed this explained the cyclical nature of Anunnaki visits and the long lifespans mentioned in ancient texts. Sitchin argued that standard academic translations of Sumerian texts were incomplete or biased by religious preconceptions. He claimed that words typically translated as God should be understood as those who came from the sky, and that references to divine powers were actually descriptions of advanced technology. For example, where mainstream scholars translate references to divine radiance or glory, Sitchin saw descriptions of spacecraft and advanced weapons. Where others read about gods creating humans from clay, he found accounts of genetic engineering. The motive for the Anunnaki presence on Earth, according to Sitchin, was mining. He claimed they needed gold to create a protective shield in their planet's atmosphere, and Earth was the nearest source of this precious metal. Sitchin pointed to evidence of extensive ancient mining in southern Africa, particularly in areas that are still major gold producers today. Some archaeological sites show mining activity dating back over 100,000 years. Far earlier than conventional history suggests humans were capable of such operations. But Sitchin's most controversial claim concerned human origins. He argued that when Anunnaki miners rebelled against the harsh working conditions, their scientists created a hybrid species combining Anunnaki DNA with that of early hominids to serve as workers. This, Sitchin claimed, explained the rapid development of human intelligence, our unusual genetic characteristics, and the sudden appearance of advanced civilizations like Sumer with no apparent evolutionary precedent. The academic response to Sitchin's work was overwhelmingly negative. Assyriologists and linguists argued that his translations were often incorrect, that he misunderstood Sumerian grammar, and that he cherry-picked evidence to support predetermined conclusions. Critics pointed out that Sitchin had no formal training in ancient languages, that his proposed planet, Nibiru, violates known laws of orbital mechanics, and that mainstream archaeology could explain the development of civilization without requiring alien intervention. Sitchin's supporters, however, argued that academic resistance was typical of paradigm-shifting ideas, and that conventional scholars were protecting their reputations and funding rather than honestly evaluating the evidence. Regardless of their accuracy, Sitchin's books sold millions of copies and spawned an entire movement of researchers exploring ancient astronaut theories. His influence can be seen in countless documentaries, books, and TV shows that continue to examine these ideas today. The evidence examined. After decades of debate, what does the actual evidence tell us? To evaluate Anunnaki theories fairly, we need to look at several types of evidence: linguistic, archaeological, genetic, and astronomical. Modern Sumerian scholarship involves hundreds of experts worldwide, sophisticated dictionaries, and computer databases containing thousands of texts. The consensus among these scholars is that Sitchin's translations contain significant errors. For example, where Sitchin translates certain words as referring to spacecraft or genetic engineering, mainstream scholars find references to traditional religious concepts. The word Anunnaki itself, while meaning those who came from heaven to earth, was a common way of describing divine beings in ancient Near Eastern cultures. Archaeological evidence for ancient astronaut theories is mixed. On one hand, we do find remarkable achievements in ancient civilizations: precise stone cutting, advanced astronomy, and sophisticated mathematics. However, experimental archaeology has demonstrated that these achievements were within the capabilities of ancient peoples using known tools and techniques. What seemed impossible to earlier generations of researchers becomes explainable as we better understand ancient technologies. Genetic studies of human origins have revealed fascinating details about our species' development. Modern humans did undergo relatively rapid evolutionary changes, and there are indeed some puzzling aspects to our genetic makeup. However, nothing in the human genome requires alien intervention to explain. Our genetic diversity patterns, evolutionary bottlenecks, and relationship to other species all fit natural evolutionary processes. The astronomical claims are perhaps easiest to evaluate. Sitchin's proposed planet Nibiru would require orbital characteristics that violate known laws of physics. Multiple searches by professional astronomers have found no evidence for such a planet. Moreover, a planet with such an extreme orbit could not support life as we know it, experiencing temperature extremes from near absolute zero to scorching heat during each cycle. So how do we explain the remarkable similarities between ancient cultures, their shared flood stories, and their consistent references to sky gods? Anthropologists point to several factors: cultural diffusion through trade and migration, common psychological needs that create similar mythological patterns, and the natural tendency of humans to explain the unknown through stories of powerful beings. Carl Jung's work on collective unconscious and archetypal patterns shows how humans across cultures tend to create similar mythological structures. The Sky Father figure appears in virtually every ancient religion, suggesting deep psychological rather than historical causes. Does this mean we should dismiss all alternative theories? Not necessarily. Science advances by questioning established ideas and remaining open to new evidence. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that evidence must meet rigorous scientific standards. Dvaki, global connections and parallels. Whether or not the Anunnaki were real, their story connects to similar accounts from cultures across the globe. These parallels raise intriguing questions about human consciousness and our shared mythological heritage. From the Americas to Asia, from Africa to Europe, ancient cultures tell remarkably similar stories. Beings from the sky who taught civilization, genetic manipulation of early humans, great floods, and promises of return. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who came from the stars. The Maya calendar tracked celestial cycles with extraordinary precision and told of multiple ages of human creation and destruction. In South America, the Inca reverence for Viracocha, the creator god who emerged from Lake Titicaca, parallels Sumerian stories of Enki rising from the waters to teach humanity. Both cultures built massive stone structures that still puzzle engineers today. Hindu texts like the Mahabharata describe the Devas, celestial beings who possessed flying vehicles called Vimanas and weapons of incredible power. The detailed descriptions of these technologies sound remarkably like modern military equipment. In Africa, the Dogon people of Mali possessed detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system centuries before telescopes could detect its binary nature. They claimed this knowledge came from visitors from Sirius, beings they called the Nomo. European traditions tell of the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, the Anunnaki-like beings who ruled before humans and possessed advanced technology. Norse mythology describes the Aesir, sky gods who lived among humans and shaped their destiny. Native American tribes across North America tell of star people who came from the sky, taught essential skills, and promised to return. The Hopi describe the Kachinas. The Lakota speak of the star nations, and countless tribes have prophecies about visitors from the heavens. These global parallels could result from several factors. Shared human psychology might create similar mythological patterns. Ancient cultural contact might have spread stories around the world. Or, as alternative theorists suggest, these could be distorted memories of actual historical events. Certain archaeological anomalies add fuel to these debates. Megalithic structures built with precision that challenges our understanding of ancient capabilities. Artifacts that seem out of place in their historical context. Ancient artwork that appears to depict modern technology. Ancient cave paintings show figures that some interpret as astronauts. Sumerian cylinder seals depict what could be DNA helixes. Egyptian hieroglyphs include symbols that resemble light bulbs and helicopters. However, it's important to note that pareidolia, our tendency to see familiar patterns in ambiguous images, might explain many of these interpretations. What looks like advanced technology to modern eyes might have had entirely different meanings to ancient peoples. Whether these global connections prove ancient contact with extraterrestrial visitors or simply demonstrate the universal nature of human consciousness and storytelling, they reveal something profound about our species' relationship with the cosmos and our desire to understand our place within it. Conclusion. As we reach the end of our journey through the Anunnaki mystery, we're left not with definitive answers, but with profound questions that continue to challenge our understanding of human history and our place in the universe. We've examined ancient texts that predate most religious scriptures, explored archaeological evidence from around the world, and considered interpretations ranging from traditional mythology to revolutionary theories about extraterrestrial contact. The facts we can agree on are these. The Sumerians created humanity's first civilization and left behind detailed accounts of beings they called the Anunnaki. These accounts describe events and technologies that, if taken literally, would revolutionize our understanding of human history. Mainstream scholarship provides naturalistic explanations for these stories, viewing them as mythological expressions of ancient peoples' religious and psychological needs. Alternative researchers see potential evidence of actual historical contact with non-human intelligence. The truth is, we may never know with complete certainty what inspired these ancient accounts. But perhaps that's not the most important question. What matters is what these stories reveal about humanity itself. They show our species' eternal quest for meaning, our desire to understand our origins, and our willingness to consider extraordinary possibilities. They demonstrate that humans have always looked to the stars and wondered if we're alone. Today, as we search for extraterrestrial intelligence with radio telescopes and space probes, as we decode the human genome and contemplate genetic engineering, as we develop artificial intelligence and plan colonies on other worlds, these ancient questions become more relevant than ever. Whether the Anunnaki were gods, aliens, or mythological figures, their story reminds us that human civilization is young, our knowledge is limited, and the universe is vast beyond imagination. It encourages us to remain humble about what we don't know and open to possibilities we haven't yet considered. The Anunnaki mystery challenges us to think critically about evidence while remaining open to wonder. It reminds us that science advances through bold questions and rigorous investigation. And it suggests that the most important discoveries about our origins may still lie ahead. Whether you see the Anunnaki as ancient gods, extraterrestrial visitors, or mythological constructs, their story continues to inspire questions about who we are, where we came from, and what our future might hold. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the truth is often stranger than we dare imagine.